So I would like to start off by welcoming everyone to today's program, which is a closing panel discussion for Queen Nefertari's Egypt, titled Queen Nefertari's Egypt, Closing Notes on Women's Power in Pre-Colonial African Civilizations. And we are very lucky to be joined by our panelists, Dr. Solange Ashby, Dr. Alozie, and Debora Heard. And before we jump into the meat of the program, I would like to begin first and foremost with a land acknowledgement. The Portland Art Museum recognizes and honors the indigenous peoples of this region. These include the Willamette Tumwater, Clackamas, Cathlamet, Motlala, Multnomah, and Watlala Chinook peoples, and the Tualatin Kalapuya, who today are part of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, and many other Native communities who made their homes along the Columbia River. We also want to recognize that Portland today is a community of many diverse Native peoples who continue to live and work here. We respectfully acknowledge and honor all Indigenous communities, past, present, future, and are grateful for their ongoing and vibrant presence. So I first would like to introduce myself. My name is Jaleesa Johnston, and I'm Head of Public Programs and Engagement at the Portland Art Museum. I would also like to begin with my verbal description. Verbal descriptions are an accessibility tool that we've been in practice with for our programs, I want to say more consistently over the last year and a half. It's a way for us to describe ourselves as the speaker so that those who are tuning into the program but cannot see the screen can get a sense of who each speaker is. So I'll begin with my verbal description. I am a Black woman. I have Black curly hair that is today tied into a side braid. I'm wearing Black rimmed glasses. I have on a red button-up, flannel button-up shirt. I have on a purple sweater and a silver necklace. I'm sitting in what is a very messy office space. I have a lot of books behind me, and in the room, the walls are painted blue. Okay, and getting back towards the program, I just want to remind everyone that Queen Nefertari's Egypt is still on view and will remain on view through the 16th of January. If you haven't had an opportunity to go see the exhibition and you're interested and able to, please do before it closes. And just to maybe tempt you to go see it if you haven't, here is an install shot of the entryway to the exhibition. So it is my pleasure tonight to be moderating today's, it is my pleasure this afternoon to be moderating today's conversation with our panelists, Dr. Solange Ashby, Dr. Alozie, and Debora Heard. I would like to call your attention to the captions. So we have automated real-time captioning available, and you can access these if you're on Zoom by clicking on the CC Live Transcript button at the bottom of the window and choosing Show Captions. Once you click on the caption box with your cursor, you can move it around the screen so that way you can see all of the material and have the best viewing set up for yourself. And if you're on Facebook, captions can be turned on by clicking the settings gear icon on Facebook Live and choosing captions. Just a note, these captions are amazing. They're really great to have. However, they are, as I mentioned earlier, automated, which means they are not always accurate. And there's going to be a lot of vocabulary that's going to be mentioned in today's program that the captions may not get correct. We will be dropping in a list of vocabulary into the chat so you can reference that throughout the program. And we also have ASL interpreters for today's program. I want to thank our interpreters, Dana Walls and Sarika Metha. Thank you for being here with us today and helping to make our program more accessible. And if you have any questions or need any technical assistance, please notify us and drop a question in the Q&A box. So if you're on Zoom, we do have the Q&A open. And if you have any questions regarding, accessibility to the program or questions for our panelists today, please put them there. and we will respond back to you. If you're on Facebook Live, just go ahead and drop them into the chat, and we have someone who will be transferring them over to us here on Zoom. All right, and finally, I would like to thank our sponsors. We would like to thank our exhibition sponsors. Queen Nefertari's Egypt is presented by Jordan Snitcher and the Harold and Arlene Schnitzer Care Foundation, with lead support from the museum's exhibition series sponsors. Additional support for the exhibition is provided by the Clark Foundation, Mr. and Mrs. Roger Burpee, the European and American Art Council of the Portland Art Museum, Kathleen and Joe Karcher, and Greg and Kathy Tibbles. Public support for the exhibition is provided by the Regional Arts and Culture Council and the Oregon Arts Commission and the Oregon Cultural Trust. And we would also like to thank all our museum's members at all levels and our larger community who visit us on a regular basis or who may have just started visiting us for the first time. Your ongoing support, especially the last 18 months, has meant so much. Okay, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Getting myself back to Zoom here so that I can read the bios for our panelists today. So it is my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. I would first like to start off by introducing Dr. Solange Ashby. Solange Ashby received her Ph.D. in Egyptology with a specialization in ancient Egyptian language and Nubian religion from the University of Chicago. Dr. Ashby's expertise in sacred ancient languages include Egyptian hieroglyphs, Demotic and Coptic, Ethiopic, Biblical Greek, and Biblical Hebrew underpins her research into the history of religious transformation in Northeast Africa and the Middle East. Her first book, Calling Out to Isis, the Enduring Nubian Presence at Philae, explores the Temple of Philae's history as a Nubian sacred site. Dr. Ashby has been awarded a President's Postdoctoral Fellowship at the University of California, Los Angeles. Her current research describes the roles of women, queens, priestesses, mothers, in traditional Nubian religious practices. In 2023, Dr. Ashby will join the faculty of the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Cultures at UCLA, where she will teach Egyptology and Nubian studies. She is a founding member of the William Leo Hansberry Society, which seeks to create pathways for people of African descent on the continent and in the diaspora to engage in the study of African antiquity. And I'll also be sharing a link to this website throughout the program. And we also have with us today, Dr. Bright Alozie. Dr. Alozie is an assistant professor of Black Studies in the Black Studies Department and an affiliate faculty in the Department of History at Portland State University in Portland, Oregon. He graduated from the University of Nigeria with a bachelor's degree in history and international studies before going on to pursue graduate studies. He earned 2 master's degrees, one in history and international studies from the University of Nigeria, and another in international politics and diplomacy from the University of Liverpool, and a PhD in history from Western Virginia University. His core research interests are social and political history in Nigeria and Africa, women, gender, and sexuality, petitions, slavery and African studies, war, identity and memory politics, digital and oral history, protests, and resistance movements. He has taught several history and Black studies courses and published numerous peer-reviewed journal articles, book chapters, book reviews, and summary articles. Dr. Alozie is a recipient of several research grants, fellowships, and paper awards. He is currently working on 2 books, Voices in Ink, Petitions and the Colonial State in Colonial Igboland, Nigeria, and Boobs in Public, Butts in Parliament, a book of poems expected to be out in fall of 2022. And our last panelist that I have the pleasure to introduce is Debora Heard. Debora is a PhD candidate in anthropology, specializing in the archaeology and history of ancient Nubia at the University of Chicago, where she has also studied the ancient Egyptian history and language. She situates her research at the intersection of anthropology, archaeology, Egyptology, Nubian studies, African studies, and Africana studies. Her dissertation research engages in a regional and temporal analysis of the inscriptions and iconography of Upper Nubian Kushite temples dedicated to the gods Amun and, sorry if I mispronounce, Apedemak.
Demek.
Thank you. I knew, I was like, I'm gonna have a hard time with this one. For more than a decade, she has given public lectures, taught courses, and participated in special programming dedicated to ancient Nubia and Egypt at the Oriental Institute, the Kemetic Institute of Chicago, Chicago State University, and the University of Nebraska, Omaha. Debora has served as an intern in the Department of Egyptian and Nubian Art at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, and as a curatorial assistant in the installation of the Picken Family Nubian Gallery of the Oriental Institute Museum. She has excavated at sites in the Nile Fourth Cataract region in Sudan, pardon me. She is a member of the Associate for the Study of Classical African Civilizations, the Sudan Archaeological Research Society, the American Research Center in Egypt, the Society of Black Archaeologists, the American Sudanese Archaeological Research Center, and most recently, she serves as the organizer and founding member of the William Leo Hansberry Society, which is committed to providing African-descended people with access, opportunity, and training in the fields of ancient Nile Valley and Northeast African studies. She earned a bachelor's in political science from Tennessee State University, a Juris Doctorate from Tulane Law School, a master's in African American Studies from Temple University, and a master's in anthropology from the University of Chicago. And it is with that that I'm super excited to be even sharing space with you all. You know what? We'll see if I can keep up, because you all, the conversation is going to fly, I guarantee that. But before I get into questions that I have prepared for our panelists, I want to first invite each panelist to speak a little bit about their research, just so that folks in the audience can gain a deeper insight into each panelist and what they're working on. So actually, let's start in the order that I read the bios. Dr. Ashby, would you be okay to start us off?
Yes, I would. So I will do a verbal description of myself. I too am a Black woman. I am middle-aged. I'm wearing blue and silver earrings and a crystal necklace. I have shoulder-length curly hair. And I'm sitting in my office at home with really boring brown walls behind me. So in terms of my research, I wrote my dissertation on prayer inscriptions that were engraved into the stone walls of temples in Nubia, most importantly, the Temple of Philae. So these were temples built by Egyptians in the area of northern Nubia, but I was describing the many Nubian visitors who came to these 10 or 12 temples in this area and left text of their prayers engraved in stone, primarily in Demotic, a late version of the Egyptian language, but also Greek, which was used as a lingua franca in Nubia, and Meroitic, the language of the kingdom of Meroe to the south. And so that's been published in a book. And now I'm working the research in this postdoc, as Julissa mentioned, is more so focused on the women, because the inscriptions that I wrote about in my dissertation were all written by men. They do mention, however, that they are praying for their mothers, that they are hoping that they have a safe journey to and from the capital city of Meroe, several hundred miles to the south, that they're performing rites before their daughters. And so the obvious next question and area of research is, what were these women doing? Because certainly they were there. The Nubians came in extended family groups, large groups of people. There were priests and political administrators, but also worshipers and extended family members. And so now I'm researching what were these women doing and what were the specific women's rights, and a larger question, who were women in the Nubian society? What roles did they fulfill? So I'll just stop there.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Ashby. And Dr. Alozie, will you share with us what your research is?
Absolutely. I'll be happy. I was answering the question about where is Nubia. I just saw. So, all right. Okay. A verbal description. I have a coat on with a white t-shirt and the Black Panther African power symbol. Yeah. I love my traditional beads, so I wear them a lot, both at home, at work, and in class, and of course, a watch. I am a Black man and proudly African. My research, I'm an assistant professor of Black Studies, but I was trained as a historian. So I studied history, and my research interests have gravitated around colonial and post-colonial West African history. This was informed by my dissertation, which focuses on over 3,000 petitions written by men and women of colonial Nigeria, southeastern Nigeria. I brought them together to recover or locate their voices, which I have tagged Voices in Ink. I use these petitions to redefine the way that colonized men and women interacted with foreign rule and British officials. My aim is to show that, yes, decision-making, the politics of colonial rule was not only informed by Britain, but also by the ordinary men and women. Hence, we have to move away from stereotypes that looks at colonial subjects in non-Western societies as passive, as having no voice, as having no power. So these sources, these petitions are underutilized, under-researched, and understudied. It's my response to extracting social and political history from a study of petitions. But more importantly was that in my research, both for my dissertation and moving forward, I became very interested in the role of women in spaces beyond the family, beyond the household. So you are right to call me a gender, a womanist, or also a feminist historian. This was informed by my own grandmother's participation in the first successful all-women-led revolt in colonial West Africa. It is popularly known as the Aba Women's War of 1929. My grandmother and her sister fought in that war. Her sister was one of those who were shot by the British officials, and she died. That has inspired me to write about women, to study women extensively and their role in both traditional Africa, in colonial Africa, and in contemporary Africa. My book project, Voices in Ink, dedicates 2 chapters to women. And more importantly, I love to teach history and study history through poetry. So my upcoming book of poems, Boobs in Public, Butts in Parliament, is a tribute to women, their activism through naked protest. And I use that poem to redefine nudity or nakedness, and to also let us move beyond the simplistic interpretations of a woman's body, to see it as an agency of power and a weapon to invoke change. So yeah, that's it so far for my research, and I am happy to be part of this panel.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Alozie. And then Debora, would you like to share more about your research?
Yes, so I guess I'll start by describing myself. I'm a Black woman, and darn it, Solange, middle-aged. I am wearing a green turtleneck sweater I have long mini locks. I'm wearing a necklace that is black rope with purple stone and silver. And that's all you need to know about what I'm wearing. I'm at a standing desk, so everything else. And in the background, I'm standing in a room that has beige walls, and it's blurred out so that you don't see the strings hanging down from my ceiling fan. So as for my research, as you said before, you know, my dissertation research is on comparing the temples dedicated to the gods Amun and Epidemic. So Amun is the Egyptian god that was brought down, or at least shared during the colonial periods. But Epidemic is a totally indigenous Nubian god. So comparing the two, I'm doing an analysis that looks at different regions. So the Amun temples that I'm examining are in the Napatan region, Napatan. Yes, and so that is the initial place where the religious and political centers were. And then they moved down south to the area of Merowe. But Merowe was always significant in the Nubian history. But so I'm making that comparison, looking at the iconography, but also the inscriptions, and trying to see what the inscriptions tell us about what makes a good ruler, what makes a person, the ruling family, what are their responsibilities to the gods, but also to the people. So that is my focus. When I started my PhD program at the University of Chicago, I was asked, we were asked, what is your burning question? And at the time, my burning question was the intersection of religion and politics. And in a way, it still is. So my research, when I'm finally finished with the dissertation, and I will not tell you how long it's taken, I want to move towards looking at origins. So I'm very concerned about where concepts came from. So especially when we talk about spirituality, where do these concepts that we see that are embodied in the gods and goddesses of Egypt and in Nubia, where did they come from? But also looking at, the migrations of people throughout the Nile Valley, because we tend to look at Egypt and Nubia as being static as far as their populations. And people were moving up and down and across the Nile Valley for as long as people could be, mobile. Way before there was Egypt, before there was Nubia, people were moving through the Nile Valley. So those are things I'm interested in. And I would like to mention in relationship to this particular talk, in 2006, I did my first public lecture at the Oriental Institute right after the Nubian Gallery was opened. And the name of the talk was, so it was looking at Nubian Kushite women. So it's queens, priestesses, and venerated mothers. And that's the way that I tend to continue to look at the royal women, their roles as queens, whether they are the wife of the king or they're actually ruling queens, the priestesses, so the princesses who served as priestesses, and also the venerated mothers, so the queen mothers who were exalted by their sons who came to rule. So those are the things that I'm interested in as far as my research.
Awesome, thank you, Deborah. And that's actually the perfect segue into the beginning question and discussion. Actually, in today's discussion, we're going to start to think about just that, right? We're going to think about Nefertari specifically, but we're also going to think about what power is, what leadership is, what womanhood is or can be, and what motherhood is throughout this discussion, and how that all sort of plays into the readings or our readings around Nefertari. And so with that, something that I would like to open up with in terms of a question is just sort of understanding more about Queen Nefertari. Throughout the run of this exhibition, and even in our past programming for this exhibition, we still have been getting a lot of feedback from audience members. There's just a desire to want to know more and more about Queen Nefertari. And so given all of, and if you've seen the exhibition, and, you know, I've shared like, you know, the works that are in the exhibition with our panelists today, so they're well aware of what's on view. And if you've been to the exhibition, there's just so much, there's so many objects and so many, you know, there's a lot of different writing and symbolism, and there's just, it's a very rich exhibition. And there's just, I feel like with one piece, you could really unpack it and really, see all the layering of meaning in there. And so given all the symbolism and the objects within the collection that's currently on view, as well as some of the historical background, how would you contextualize Queen Nefertari's leadership among the larger scope of Egyptian queen lineages? And I'll just open it up, so please feel free to speak as you feel called to.
Okay. Well, I could take the first shot. All right. And I am sure that Solange and Debora would flesh out or tease out some of the important points I would highlight based on their specialties in Egypt and Nubia. But allow me please to share my slide with a few points to note. 1 second, please. Okay. Here we go. Okay. All right. So for one thing, when we look at Queen Nefertari, her personality, her being, her leadership, and we try to contextualize her in the larger scope of female leadership, both in the Egyptian queen lineages and in African female leadership, Queen Nefertari stands out. It is not surprising that she is the one for whom the sun shines. That title alone, as we would come to learn in this discussion, signifies a lot, both spiritually, politically, and even in day-to-day life. And when we place her in the context of other queens, she is one of the most outstanding. She ranks way right up there. We have Nefertiti, and of course, Nefertiti is different from Nefertari. We also had Queen Cleopatra, we had Hatshepsut. For these lines of queens, for these queens, they were very influential. They were very noteworthy. But talking about Nefertari, she was also very highly regarded, and not just highly regarded by her husband, Pharaoh Ramesses II. She was highly regarded by her people. She was also highly educated. She was one of the few and by the few, I mean both men and women who were sophisticated in education. And talking about education, she could read and write the hieroglyphs, which was very important, not just as a means of preserving history, but also as a means of literacy. And when we flesh this point out, we'll see that it is evident from records, from historical records, that women, African women in traditional Africa, actually we are very well educated, more than popular literature seemed to present. They were highly educated. We see African women in top business positions. We see African women highly educated along the trans-Saharan trade routes. We see African women as kings and queens consorts. We see African women involved in tasks and duties that that demanded a high intellectual and literacy qualifications. So hats off to them. Let's give it to them that from history, from evidence, beyond this royal discussion, African women generally were well educated. And as Jalisa just mentioned, Queen Nefertari's tomb is immense. It is awe-inspiring, if you ask me. Looking at that tomb, it is very big. It is beautiful. From the basic details that you see when you get into the, walk into the exhibition or the tomb, to the very minute details, to the murals that you see on almost every surface. It reveals a whole lot about her queendom, as I always like to say. It reveals a whole lot about her leadership. It reveals a whole lot about history, particularly African women's history. So I would end this contribution here by isolating a few things that made her to stand out. Like those very notable queens, she was very outstanding. Her name appears in almost every monument that you could talk about. It hints at her importance, and this is beyond her role, or beyond the women's place, where they say, oh, women are meant to be in the household. No, Queen Nefertari displayed active leadership, strength. She played a part in politics. She was a diplomatic aide to her husband. She corresponded with neighboring kingdoms as well. For instance, the Hittites. She performed a lot of royal duties. From available historical records, it was a known fact that when the Pharaoh Ramesses II was crowned, Nefertari was always with him, traveled with him. The Pharaoh sought advice from him all the time. This shows us that connection that she has. And beyond that, she also played important religious roles and spiritual roles. And we're going to talk about this much later, but she represented the female aspect of the divine on earth. Now, for context, we'll see that traditionally, most duties were performed, as temple duties were performed by men. But in Queen Nefertari's case, she actually served the gods. And women actually represented, there were women who served gods. Temple duties were also performed by women. Nefertari was that earthly embodiment of goddess. She was that earthly embodiment that her role went beyond biological duties. Her role went beyond what was typically expected, or in our constructions of womanhood, what was typically expected of a woman. So we see the meaning of her name right there. And Nefertari Merit Mut, beloved of the goddess Mut. That just shows us how much she was revered, how much of spiritual and religious roles that she occupied. I would leave this particular part of the conversation to be fleshed out by Solange and Debora. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Alozie. Yeah, that was something that when we were gathering as a group and sort of fleshing things out, I remember specifically Dr. Ashby and Debora just like started this really interesting conversation around titles, which was above my head quite a bit. But I would love it if you could sort of pick up from there and sort of help us understand the different titles bestowed upon Queen Nefertari.
Okay, I'll go next. Let me just start by situating Queen Nefertari in the longer Egyptian history. So we have 3,000 years of pharaonic history about. And so Nefertari is in that most prominent or probably best known period called the New Kingdom, when we had rulers like Tutankhamun, Hatshepsut, and Nefertiti. They all belong to the 18th dynasty. that first dynasty in the New Kingdom, starting around 1550 BCE, and then followed by the 19th dynasty. And this is when the Ramessid kings appear. And almost everybody has the name Ramses or Seti. Nefertari's husband, of course, was Ramses II. And she, I think, was the 5th queen of this dynasty. Then comes the 20th dynasty, more Ramses kings before everything sort of falls apart. So here we are right in the center of Egypt's imperial and financial power, if you will, like the very richest phase of this ancient kingdom and the greatest extent of empire. So I'm just going to share my screen and show you a little bit, a few scenes from inside of that amazing tomb that Dr. Alozie was just describing to us. I was incredibly fortunate to be able to visit it, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago. It is truly stunning. But I wanted to show this to sort of highlight the way that the queen is shown interacting with so many ancient Egyptian divinities, most especially goddesses. So I'll just start off by pointing out here, I hope you can see my cursor. Right here in the yellow, in this cartouche, is her name written. So you can see the hieroglyphs for her name here in the center. And then, as Dr. Alozie alluded to, she is called Merit Mut. And so it's a little bit beat up there, but at the top, you'll see that vulture. And so that is the writing for the goddess Mut, who he told us the name means mother, but it is also the word used to refer to a vulture, but also to this goddess. And I'll just point out here that this beautiful image of Nefertari, she is wearing a crown that the Egyptian queens often wore. It's literally a vulture sort of spreading its wings down over the sides of her head. So she's here being very visually connected to this goddess again. Her primary titles are here in this column. And so it says the great wife of the king, or great royal wife, and then mistress of the two lands. And so these are sort of her most prominent titles. I did a quick tally. It seems she has 32 different titles on various royal monuments. Most of them refer to her in terms of her relationship to the king. So the great royal wife, or titles like mistress of love, mistress of joy and beauty, ways in which she is pleasing to her spouse or related to her husband, the king. But then she also holds ritual titles, referring to different scepters. So you'll see this goddess here has what we call a was scepter, sort of like a staff of ritual office. And so there are titles related to her various scepters, ritual scepters that she holds, or a sistrum, a sacred rattle that is particularly associated with the goddess Hathor. And then 8 different times she has titles that are related to her being what we call a chantress, which is just a fancy way of saying a ritual singer. And this is a role that was often filled by women, royal and non-royal. They would sing before a god as a way to propitiate or please a particular god or goddess. Okay, so let me go to the next slide. I've just listed out some of her titles. So I mentioned that Sweet of Love, Great of Love is referring to the queen as being appealing and loving to her husband, the king. But then in this next line, a title that says the Great One of the Henner Harem of Horus, Horus being reference to the king. And this comes from the Luxor temple at Thebes in southern Egypt. And that Henner harem is a group of women who were traditional dancers who danced in reverence for the goddess Hathor. Similarly, the next title I have on the screen, The Lady of the Yamet Tree, is making reference to this tree called Yamet in Egyptian, but the sycamore tree that was sacred to the goddess Hathor. So we're seeing the queen being repeatedly connected to this goddess Hathor, in addition to the goddess Mut. And then these two final titles that I pulled out, Mother of the God, to allude back to what Dr. Alozie was saying about, and we'll talk a bit more about the sacredness of this role as mother, or wife of the god. And in both of these cases, may be talking about the king as a divine being. I just wanted to point out as I wrap up that these last two titles, Mother of the God and Wife of the God, we first see in that preceding 18th dynasty at the very beginning of the New Kingdom, used by Ahmose Nefertari, who was an amazing queen. And she was the first one to hold a very important title called God's Wife of Amun. I just wanted to show you this amazing image of her. It's one that I really love. She was an incredibly powerful queen who continued to be revered centuries after her death. I mentioned that she held this title of God's Wife of Amun, and we could talk a little bit more about what that means perhaps later. But to connect it to Nubia, so to bring us a little bit into the Nubian realm, I wanted to bring to your attention this Nubian princess, Amenertis I, who was the first of two royal Nubian, princesses who held this position, which essentially meant that they ruled in their father's stead in southern Egypt, while often their father would return to his kingdom in the south, so back to Napata that Deborah mentioned earlier, while the daughter then would stay and do the day-to-day running of things in Egypt. I think that's all that I have for you. Yes, so let me stop sharing and cede the floor then to Deborah.
All right, so Dr. Alozie and Dr. Ashby have covered most of the material that we were going to cover in that first question, which is fine because I'm looking at the time and we have a few more questions to get to. But I wanted to kind of step back in looking at this question of placing her within an Egyptian context. And I think that and we will talk about how she disrupts certain ideas or concepts that we have that we talk about as far as power and things of that sort. But I think that we cannot overlook the fact that she was a favored wife. She had, so he built this huge monument to her in Lower Nubia, right next to him. So Abu Simbel, this beautiful monument to his wife. And of course, we looked at the pictures from inside of her mortuary temple. So we can't dismiss or kind of overlook the fact that she was a favored wife, and she had certain privileges based on that relationship that she had with her husband. The fact that she was able to engage in diplomacy, so that's something that we don't normally see with a queen, but she's writing letters to the Hittite king and queen. So she is doing something, and when we think about the 18th and 19th dynasty, particularly the 18th dynasty, it is a phenomenal time for women. So you have Queen T, who's right there next to her husband, Amenhotep III. You have Nefertiti, who's there with Akhenaten. And so you see that these women are in close relationships with their husbands, that they're just not their consort, they're not just their wives, that they have some influence as far as how they govern. But even amongst that, and you think about, we have Queen Hatshepsut, who is a ruler of her own. She takes power and she's ruling on her own. So you have to place Nefertari within that context of looking at these phenomenal women of the New Kingdom. So when we think about the fact that she was educated, and I don't want to jump your question, Delisa. So I'll stop there and let you ask the question, and then I can pick up.
Thank you. Well, the next question is sort of just thinking a little bit more about this idea of like what it means to be, or what it could have meant to be a woman and womanhood within that context, and sort of like picking it apart. Because something that I really appreciate in the discussion right now is, really asking us to look again at what it means to be a wife of this ruler, and really like rethink, and maybe even like try to withhold our own assumptions that we're bringing to the table about what it means to be a wife, and then the kind of power or limited power within that role. So one of the things I appreciate is us to like asking us to rethink what that means. And so with that, rethinking what woman and womanhood are within the context of not just Queen Nefertari, but within like ancient African civilizations as a whole, or not as a whole, but like on a larger platform.
Debora, go ahead.
So I'll pick back up because I was kind of going into that. So when we think about concepts of power, so we tend to look at power as being something that a person exercises over, like domination. And we tend to kind of overlook influence, because you can exercise influence in the background that will determine what happens in the governing, as far as governance. And so you have to look at the role of women in that way. I think that we tend to, and when I say we, I mean, historians, anthropologists, Egyptologists, we tend to use categories such as power and dominance and education, and take that concept that we have in our mind that is totally Western, totally contemporary, and impose that on the past. But we can't do that. So looking at power in the Nile Valley, looking at power in Africa, how is that different? So one of the things that we have to look at as far as women exercising power is the role of the mother. So in our Western society, especially, you think about how people dismiss stay-at-home mothers. There is a way in which women's roles as mothers is totally seen as not important. But if you look in Africa, if you look at the Nile Valley, you see that there is a very important role for motherhood. And so I am going to share my screen now. So what we're looking at here is a Nubian queen. So, and I should stop here and define Nubia, because that was a question I saw in the chat as far as the boundaries. So the boundaries for ancient Nubia kind of fluctuated, but the boundary between ancient Egypt and Nubia was at the first cataract, so around the area of Elephantine. So that is the border between Egypt and Nubia. So in contemporary times, that is a part of the country of Egypt, but in ancient times, that was part of Nubia. So from the first cataract around Elephantine to the area around Wadi Halfa, where the dam was erected, that was Lower Nubia. So Lower Nubia, historically, Lower Nubia has been flooded by the dam. The area upstream from there is Upper Nubia. So when we talk about Nubia, we're thinking this area immediately to the south, that border region at the first cataract between, that signifies the border between Egypt and Nubia. So I hope that answers your question about that. So looking at these ancient queens, we look at how Nefertari and women of the ancient past disrupt these ideas about power. So you see this queen, and this is one of the reigning queens of Meroe. Meroe was around the fifth cataract in what's in Sudan now, but that's Upper Nubia, the Kushite kingdom. And what I find fascinating about her is that she's showing, and there's a line of ruling queens in Nubia. And it doesn't just start in this particular time period. There's a ruling queen as early as the Old Kingdom in Nubia. But what we see with these queens is that they are able to portray themselves in a way that's very different from what modern conception of beauty and power are. So this woman is totally full-figured. And I compare her to someone like Hatshepsut. So Hatshepsut, there were times when after she took power that she used the false beard. She used the male pronoun to talk about herself, and it wasn't a thing about gender fluidity or anything like that. It was the fact that within the ethos, the mythology of kingship, the reigning ruler is a personification of Horus, and Horus is male. So if you have a female, then how do you put that together with Horus being male? So there was this kind of, it wasn't a part. It was seen as something that had to be, dealt with on the level of, the mythology, and she had to sometimes portray herself in a male fashion. But you have a queen like Amanishketo, and she is totally powerful. She's standing there with prisoners. She's got a bow. She's got her scepter, and she's wearing a dress, and she's wearing her shawl, and she's got her nails done. So she is totally female and totally the ruler, totally powerful, and there's no contradiction. So I think that we have to start pulling back, what is our definition of power and how do we look at power? So I just wanted to bring that out. And I'm going to share some other slides, but I'm going to kind of see the floor because we need to be kind of having a discussion about this.
Yeah, I'm wondering if Dr. Ashby or Dr. Alozie, if you wanted to add on anything, any more thoughts around power, around motherhood, around.
Okay, so can I move a little bit away to bring in West African case studies just to exemplify this? To Debora's point, we really need to broaden our scope of motherhood, especially because it is very loaded in the African context. So I would explain this from the notion in Eastern Nigeria. It has a saying that goes, "Why buife?" Just this saying right here where my cursor is. It is a saying that a woman is always something of worth. So now, while there, we have these somewhat universal notions of womanhood, when we talk about African sense of womanhood, it is quite different, as Debora had pointed out. The African woman, the African mother is a multifaceted, complex being. So here, she goes beyond birthing and nurturance of an individual. She births and nurtures a nation. There's another Nigerian saying that says, within the hips of a woman lie a kingdom. Literally, in her womb is a kingdom. Within her fabric is that profound ability that she has to birth nations, one generation at a time. Now, when we even stretch it further, we'll see that so many empires and kingdoms in traditional West Africa have been sustained, nurtured by women. Recently, the Asante people of Ghana celebrated their annual festival honoring women. In Asante, Ghana, there's a saying that goes, it is a woman who gave birth to a man. It is a woman who gave birth to a king. Now, this brings the concept of the Queen Mothers. The Queen Mother or the Queen herself is totally powerful, influential, and please, to Deborah's point too, when we flesh out power and influence, we also should add authority, right? So she is powerful, she is authoritative, she exhibits that influence in her own right, and her essence is not determined by the fact that, oh, she is married to a king or she is the mother of a king. No, not at all. Her stool is not predicated by the stool of the king or of her son or of her husband. They are also not necessarily, even though they could be, even though they are in some cases, mothers of the sitting king. But her title as Queen Mother does not necessarily mean that, literal mother of the king. It goes beyond that. That's very important. So in terms of her influence, she determines succession, who the next monarch is going to be, male or female. She determines inheritance rights. She calls the shots. Literally, when they say who run the world, please give it to African women. Yeah, she determines rights. She determines obligations of citizens. And in some cases, she is also the co-ruler with the king. In Asante Kingdom in West Africa, today's Ghana, the Queen Mother have her own stool. And please, by stool, I mean the throne. It's the same thing as European throne that legitimizes a European monarch. Her stool symbolizes that fact that she holds the office based on her qualifications, not those of any man, not those of her husband or her son. Not just in Ghana, in ancient Asante Kingdom, of course, the Queen Mothers are called Ahima. We also have, in today's landlocked Eswatini place, we have the Queen Mother who is called Gwamile. In fact, she's referred to as the great she elephant. And this by using the great she elephant, it signified her strength, her ability to bear with, bear children and nations, and also her ability to move majestically and command respect. Then we have the Ganda Queen Mothers of Buganda. These in Buganda, this is very important to note. In ancient Buganda, Queen Mothers were the traditionally recognized kingmakers. Note, they were the traditionally recognized kingmakers. So they made the kings. So that is to say, no matter how we look at it, whether the monarch is female or male, in ancient Buganda, the shots are called by the women, by the Queen Mother. So in that sense, we could say that the society, the kingdom, the nation would not flourish without the yes of the Queen Mother, if that makes sense. And of course, beyond that, we had female kings. And this is very important now that these ones assumed, as Deborah noted, in the absence, say, of when the son or the male heir is too young to rule, right? But in some cases, there were those who have stood out by their sheer bravery. They've been part of several warfares. They've been part of several waging wars and being successful, like the men have been, in their own right. Their success, their ability to excel, even in spaces that were thought to be occupied by men, made them stand out. They had showed exceptional leadership experience. They became female kings. And here we see them transgressing, gender roles from time to time. Even in Nigeria, we had Ahebi Ogabi, the female king of colonial Nigeria. This is important to note because in colonial Nigeria, it was male dominated. I mean, colonial rule really messed the authority of women up, right? Their influence. They undermined and diminished the influence of women. But in colonial Nigeria, we find Ahebi Ogabi standing out, breaking those barriers of male dominance in a predominated male colonial structure. And of course, we had the Ojito, mother of the leopard, who is the reign mate, note, reign mate of the king. So the Ojito in ancient kingdom of Fon in Dahomey, which is today's Benin Republic, West Africa, the Ojito is at par with the king. In fact, the king cannot take a decision, cannot make a decision for the well-being of the citizens without his reign mate. That is very important to know. So we see that in these cases, women really occupied very influential roles in traditional Africa. And some princesses, some as queen mothers, some as kings, as female kings, some as queens. And in some cases too, these women were also having, the ability to be deified. They were deified in most cases. They became goddesses, revered goddesses like Princess Inipi. It was believed that she was a goddess in her own right. So yes, these are some of the extensive, traditional influence and significance of women, both as queen mothers, female kings, princesses, reign mates, and queens as well.
I just wanted to jump in there for a second. And so in following what Dr. Alozie was saying, when we were having our meeting, we talked about, when we talk about influence, we have to think about within the Ashanti Kingdom, the British had taken King Prempeh I and exiled him because he didn't want to go along with British rule. And so then the colonial administrator was like, bring me the golden stool so I could sit upon it. Because the golden stool was the symbol of kingship for the Ashanti people. And even the stool was so sacred that the king didn't actually sit on it. So he wanted to totally defile their concept of kingship, their culture. And so they, the elder men were like wringing their hands like, oh, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? We're afraid. You're not gonna bring him back. The Queen Mother, Ya Asantewa, was like, if we have to, every woman, every girl will pick up a weapon and we will fight to the death. If you won't do it, then we will. Now, what does it look like for a man to be told, if you're not gonna act, we're gonna take over, we're gonna act, we're gonna go to war? So that influence, it was like, okay, she was the spark, like, yes, we're gonna fight. But it took the Queen Mother saying, if I got to use my machete, I will do it. We will fight to the death. We will not allow our golden stool to be defiled by these Europeans. So again, influence. She wasn't the queen, she was a mother, but that mother inspired the army to act. So you have to look at, the influence of a mother. They're also disrupting this idea of what education is. So we talk about Nefertari being literate and she was able to write. But I think that part of why we don't understand women's literacy is that we don't really look in women's spaces for literacy. We have to understand that women were in charge of households. So they were keeping records in the household. They were selling agricultural goods. If you can't count, you'll get cheated. So you best believe if they're going out in the marketplace, they know how to count, they know how to keep records. So, our ideas of education, even, we have to kind of rethink that. Hatshepsut, and I like to talk about her specifically because she shows that these queens, these princesses, when they were growing up, were educated. They weren't just being pretty and being taken care of. When her father died and she had to marry her half brother, And then he died, and she's like, I am just as intelligent as that guy was. My mother was the queen. My father was the king. If I had been born male, I would be pharaoh. So we're just going to kick that little idea to the side that I can't be a ruler because I'm female. I'm just as educated. I'm just as powerful, and I know what I'm doing, and I'm probably better educated and smarter than most of the men around me in court. So she she had support because they knew that she was educated and she could take on those responsibilities. So yeah, so even talking about how we deal with education, we have to start rethinking and looking at women's spaces, because women weren't powerless. When we talk about gender roles, that again is a Western concept that we're imposing, like women can't do certain things because they're female. It's like, no, there is a complementarity that is at work. And so women perform certain duties, but if they need to perform other duties that they're typically performed by a male, they can do it. And there is there's no reason that or any they really are not transgressing, I should say, when they act in that way. They're doing what needs to be done, and that's how the society functioned. That was their culture. So we have to re-examine how we think about these cultures and stop imposing Western notions on the past.
Debora, can I do a quick follow-up on this? You talked about education of women, and something interesting, came to my head. Yeah, today we all love, we are women, people generally love beauty, our mascara, our eyelining, makeup, baking our faces for that big face. Look, nobody beat ancient Egypt in the study of cosmetology. As a matter of fact, cosmetology, facial aesthetics, was a professional branch of learning in Egypt. Who ran the show in that field? Women. Women were detailed in actually learning and sharing with the world the art of facial aesthetics, of body surgeries as well. Even so, ancient Egypt was renowned for being the first society and civilization to document nearly 200 cures of diseases. In this documentary, from primary historical records, women were professional pharmacists who helped in this research, who helped to document this. So really, we're talking about that literacy, talking about that knowledge base. Women were fountains and foundation cornerstones of such literacy. And for our viewers and listeners, I would want to, if you can, I want to say that if you can read this book, it is a very, very beautiful and insightful read. I have it here all the time. I teach my African history classes with it. What Debora was trying to say even about the complementarity of roles in female monarchs and merchant queens in Africa, Wanda Chebe, who is Africa's foremost feminist historian, talked about the phenomenon of gendered males and gendered females. It refers to the way that the interconnected universe allows biological males to transform themselves into females, and in terms of their roles and vice versa. So here you don't see that, you see more of a complementarity rather than conflict, so that even though these are women and these are men, if it requires the woman to do these roles, these gendered roles, by the way, gender is a social construct. If it requires a woman to do this gendered role, she will step in immediately to do it. So that is why we could talk about male priestesses, female husbands. My own grandmother's sister married a female husband. She was a royal priestess. That's why we could talk about female headmen, female kings, female pharaohs. So all of these even translate to the roles of women. We see parallels in the roles of women today. They are also resurrecting this or continuing this age-old gendered roles that they've already played in the past. And lastly, in Nigeria, in southeastern Nigeria, and largely in West Africa, to Deborah's point about the Asante and that stool experience, we see that there is a concept that is called sitting on a man. Sitting on a man is a traditional and symbolic act where women literally and symbolically sit on men, and men allow themselves to be sat on. By sitting, they make war on erring men, on men who have they messed up, and men who do not do their responsibilities. They sit on him, shame him, and call him to order. This was practiced by women, traditional women. It was evidence of their influence. And of course, they also had their own committees and councils that determined affairs and made decisions that impacted society. So yeah, I would really recommend this book as a good read for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Alozie. And I just wanted to, well, first, I just wanted to check in, Dr. Ashby, is there anything that you would like to add? I just want to make sure I open that space there.
I had some thoughts I could add, but I wanted to also see if we want to leave time for audience questions.
Yeah.
So I'll just, yeah.
So I would like to invite the audience, please submit questions. If you're on Zoom, put them in the Q&A. And if you're on Facebook, put them in the chat. And then in the meantime, while we wait for audience questions, if there are any, Dr. Ashby, if there's anything you'd like to add, or if anybody else would like to add anything while sometimes it takes a minute to get our thoughts together for questions.
I will, yeah. A couple things popped to mind when Deborah was talking about the golden stool in Nigeria. I was thinking that there's something equivalent in Egyptian religious iconography, royal iconography, that the goddess Isis, the writing of her name. Of course, Isis is the Greek version of the Egyptian name Aset. And so the writing of the goddess's name is the throne itself. So she very much personifies that royal seat that her son Horus then will ascend to become the divine king of Egypt. So there's parallels there. And then the conversations about the Queen Mother that Dr. Alozie was referring to, the power, the incredible power and authority that she has. I just wanted to link that to the Meroitic title Kandake that you probably or may have heard. It's rendered in Greek again as Candace, so that comes down as names that we use in these Western societies, but it really is to this Meroitic title for this most important powerful woman in the culture, who I know Deborah has written about this, was required to be there present for her son, not under the Meroitic title, but in the earlier Napatan period, had to be present while he was waiting to, or going to be coronated, so crowned as king. But they seem to have been the women who gave birth to offspring, and those offspring were the only people, male or female, who were eligible then to ascend the throne. And Dr. Alozie has alluded to this similarity. So I just will bring that out, and hopefully we have some questions now.
We do. So we have one audience question here. Someone had asked, please talk further about the she elephant of South Africa. I find that interesting because elephants are very matriarchal.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we should also understand something that animals have also been depicted significantly in African history, not just for their being as animals, but also for the qualities that they reflect in terms of power, in terms of mothering, in terms of their immense beauty, size, and of course the ability to coordinate. So yeah, in ancient South Africa too, we find in fact, not just Southern Africa, even in West Africa and in East Central Africa, we see the elephant becoming a symbol of womanhood, a key symbol of womanhood, and in most cases, deified as well. Now, this symbolism, is testament to the fact that you look at the immense size of the elephant. Yeah, and in most cases, they are for a woman. So in her, in a woman, is depicted in the elephant place is depicted a woman in her sense of bearing, in her size, and by that size, we mean symbolically, the size of the elephant is meant to reflect the size of a nation that a woman easily nurtures and brings to birth. In fact, in one particular depiction, an elephant is seen as roaring, her voice echoing throughout the forest. That shows the influence of a woman when she speaks, how much influence the woman, and here we bring the Queen Mother again to this instance, how much influence her voice goes to the far-flung corners of the kingdom and beyond. In fact, in West Africa, women had this kind of elephant-like voice as well, where they could cover nearly 300 miles in terms of passing information through their women councils. And within 2 days, faster than Amazon Prime, this information had gotten to everybody who needs it. I'm not kidding. Yeah, it was one of the things that was very influential to the success of the Women's War in 1929. So yes, these animals, elephants, and of course we had the leopard as well, and so many other animals have been core attributes in the terms of the strength, influence, and sheer size of the woman. Then again, this is something we might flesh out much later. The birthing process of an elephant is not easy at all. Yet, the moment the elephant gives birth, one thing you always notice in the flock would be that other mothers come together after the elephant gives birth. Now, this is symbolic as well of the support, that the chain of support that African women have always had for themselves. Credit is not given enough to African women for how they've managed COVID-19. The Western narrative is like, oh, Africa is having low death in COVID-19 and all of that. What is happening? What does it mean? Like, oh, are they so burnt out by the sun? Or not? No, women have been the fountain, the stronghold in communities of holding this together, of making sure that this does not even escalate to the point that it has escalated in Europe and in North America. So all of these are some, symbolic interpretations of, animal depictions when it comes to women's influence, authority, and power.
Thank you. And I was wondering if I want to open the floor, if Dr. Ashby or Deborah wanted to add to that. I know there's another question as well about the relationship between people and animals.
I can just answer verbally because I was typing an answer, but the person was asking about Sekhmet, who is represented as a lion-headed goddess. And I was typing that her name in the Egyptian language literally means the powerful one, with that T ending indicating that's a powerful female one. And so she is a goddess of illness and plague, pandemic, like we should all be lighting a candle to Sekhmet right now. But she is also incredibly powerful and embodying those lions, felines. And then I'll refer back to the comment about the elephants as well, that very much were living together in the kingdom of Kush with these people in antiquity. So they were very much present. I'll just take a quick second. Let's see if I can share this to show a big statue, I guess you can call it, at a temple called Musawarat es-Sufra in Sudan. So in the ancient kingdom of Merowe. And there you see this elephant really being revered at this temple. And so it's very much giving divine attributes, recognizing the power inherent in these local animals who were very much present in this area in antiquity.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to let the audience know we have about roughly 9 more minutes. So if there are any lingering questions, please add them into the Q&A or into the chat.
So I had a few more slides that I wanted to share so we could talk about that. So we've already seen that slide, but I wanted to get to this one because this shows the same queen of Shiketo, and it was found inside of her temple to Amun that she constructed. She was a ruling queen of Meroe. And here she is with the goddess Amasimi, who is another totally indigenous Nubian goddess. And what you will see is that she is giving her life. There are ankh signs going into her nostrils. But what I really want you to pay attention to is her body. So this is at, towards the end of her life. And you see that she is not the svelte queen that she was, back in the day. She's a little saggy towards the middle. Her arms are flabby, but she still gives this regal appearance. And that is because what I see in this is that she's showing her body as one who has given birth. So as a queen and as a mother, she has nursed the nation. And so going back to what Dr. Alozie was saying, her flabby body, her big arms, whatever, is not to be seen as something, derogatory, but is to be applauded, that she has gotten to the end of her life and she has literally nursed the nation with her body as ruler. So they're celebrating her, so it's not, when we talk about body positivity, this is it, she can be an older woman and still be regarded as being beautiful. And so I wanted, again, we're going here with Nefertari, going back to her, but what I wanted to show, and we've talked about this, is you see the vulture, and that is Mut, the word Mut. So it's the goddess, but it's also the word for mother. So when we think about and the Kushites also had this reverence for Mut as well. So she was the consort of Amun. When we think about it, the mother has this kind of supernatural quality about her. When you think about the fact that you would use the same word to designate the mother, any mother, but also the mother goddess. So the only distinction is that you'll have a determinative that shows that she's a goddess. So when you think about it in that way, again, you have to take it out of a Western framework and think about it in the context of Nile Valley culture. The mother is revered, but the mother has a supernatural quality. So she is not to seem as irreverent, to think of the mother as being a goddess, as being supernatural, because she is, as Dr. Alozie was saying, she is the queen, she's the kingmaker. So out of her body comes the king, but it is her relationship. She talks, when we have, I don't think we have I didn't put the Napatan inscriptions in here. This is one from the Meroitic, but the queen mother goes before the god and petitions him, Amun, the kingmaker, to give the throne to her son. So she is literally the kingmaker, literally through her body, but also spiritually as a priestess, the one who speaks that thing that becomes the reality. I would ask that you give your son the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt. So she's not asking as an earthly mother, she's asking as a supernatural power, speaking to the God, asking him to work on behalf of her son. So here we have the royal couple, the Takamani and the Manitore, at the temple of Apidimek at Naga. And so here we have the lion-headed god. So we have male gods and female goddesses that are embody that lion spirit. So he's a hunter, he's a warrior god, but he also has this fertility aspect to him as well. And you see that he's giving life to the entire royal family. So you have the King Natakamani, Queen Amanitore, and their son all being given life by the god. What is phenomenal about this couple, though, some people argue that she might be the queen mother, but there are indications that she is actually the ruling queen, because this is at a time where we have this line of ruling queens. And so when you look at the burials at Merowe, her pyramid is actually larger than the Takamani's. So there's a line of thought that is that she was actually the ruler and she shared her throne with her husband. So again, you think about power, influence, it's more complicated than what we think when we place it in a Western model. We have to take it out and deconstruct, what it is that we're looking at.
Thank you. And well, I'm just seeing that it's 3:28 now. And I see that there was a question, but thank you, Dr. Ashby, for responding to that question through typing. So I think what I'll do right now is just wrap up the program and thank everyone. But first, before I do that, I just want to remind everyone, I'm going to drop the link again. Just re-showing the link for the William Leo Hansberry Society. Both Dr. Ashby and Debora are founding members of this society, and it seeks to create pathways for people of African descent on the continent and in the diaspora to engage in the study of African antiquity. So just re-sharing that link. And then also, I just want to thank you, Dr. Ashby, Dr. Alozie, and Debora. Thank you so much. I mean, you were right. Like when we had started planning for this, we had talked and we're like, yeah, we could go in for like hours. And I feel like still it's just like the very tip of the iceberg for how deep the conversation can go. But I really do appreciate you giving your time, your expertise, and your scholarship to this conversation. I feel like this is a really great way to wrap up Nefertari, an exhibition that's been really popular. People within Portland have been really interested in coming and seeing the work, and to be able to, open up the exhibition with thinking about women in ruling power, and then to be able to close it to continue to think about it, but to also pick apart and complicate what power is, what motherhood, to ask us to think a little more or to think differently about what they are, has been really valuable for me, and I hope really valuable for our listeners today. And I would also like to thank our interpreters again. I would like to thank Dana, and I would like to thank Sarika. Thank you again for interpreting and making today accessible. I also want to thank, I didn't get to shout out my colleague, Becky Emmert, who's been on the back end of Zoom this entire time, helping with spotlighting, dropping links into Facebook, and just keeping an eye and making sure that we're all afloat. So thank you, Becky. And that is all. Just a reminder that the exhibition is open through the 16th. So if you're able to come out, please do. All right. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a good Sunday. Enjoy.
Thank you, Jaleesa. Well done.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye.